What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance Crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today we're going to be getting into a quick little video that not really quick, but it's a video that I saw on just scrolling through YouTube, and it looked like something that was interesting, something that I want to do a reaction to, and something that I thought that you would be interested in as well. And it is called, What If the Cold War Went Nuclear? Now, I know this is a scenario that a lot of people have probably thought about. They probably have books written about it. But the thing that I'm really curious about is what type of video this is going to be. Because the thumbnail looked like it was a map that showed like spots that were being hit with nukes. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a video that analyzes like where likely targets of nuclear strikes would have been had the Cold War gotten hot. But, or if it's going to be like an alternative history hub where they go through like the actual story and like different events that leads to certain attacks and whatnot. I don't even know where it's going to start. Like, is it going to start with the Cuban Missile Crisis? Is it going to start with the end of World War II? Like, where exactly? Because things could change depending on when the real fighting starts. Well, let's just jump into it, I guess. The only way I can really get my answer is if I watch it. So let's check this out. This video was created by a channel called Whatifalthist or Whatifalthist, something like that, like Whatifalthist. I don't know exactly what it's trying to. I thought it was what if something, but it says what if, and then it's like all tithis. Maybe that's a thing, and I just butchered it, but you can go ahead and give it a try because there will be an icon that'll pop up at the end of this video. You can click on it, go to their channel, watch their stuff, and if you enjoy it, then subscribe, like, all the other good stuff. The original link will be in the description box down below. Always watch the original video before you watch the reaction. That's the only way you can really give the original content creator a view and offer them support. Now, with that being said, hopefully by now you've already seen it if you're still watching it. Let's go ahead and check this out.
The second half of the 20th century has been a great question. Ever since the invention of the atom bomb in 1945, mankind has had the ability to do irreparable damage to itself. This sword has hung over our heads ever since, with us continuing to live our lives with the knowledge that in half an hour it could all be gone.
Yeah, this picture right here is very interesting because, like, when you think about nuclear attacks and nuclear bombs and things like that, you don't really think too much about the magnitude and the scale of the bomb itself. Like, when you think of nuclear bombs, you just think of destruction. But you forget that there are different levels to nuclear bombs. Like, the one that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are extremely weak to today's standards. Like, we have bombs that are literally like thousands of times stronger than those bombs. Or at least hundreds for sure. I know that much. So it's like, yeah, the only bombs that we've seen do devastation to cities. So much devastation, in fact, that it's pretty much been a deterrent for every other nuclear bomb since then. Those bombs that set that example are now weak when it comes to today's standards. So it's like, you can only imagine the damage that these new bombs could do. And I know that there's like a website that you can open up a map and it'll show you like a diagram of how much damage the specific type of bomb would do on a specific city or whatever. But I'm talking about like visuals. Like this, you can see the destruction.
We've been exceptionally lucky that the only nukes to be used in anger were in the Second World War. The human race has shown exceptional foresight and self-control when a gun's been put to its head. However, there was once a point where everything nearly did fall apart.
Yep.
In 1983, an error in the Soviet missile tracking system showed that the Americans were launching a nuclear attack against Russia. Soviet-American relations were simmering at the time, and so from a political perspective, it was not unreasonable. We were saved by Stanislav Petrov.
Yes, this man's name needs to be remembered throughout all of history, period. I don't know why, as an American, we don't hear enough about this person. This guy saved, like, I know that everybody talks about wanting to save the world and being a hero and all this other stuff. Like, I get it. It sounds fun, and the idea that you can be like a superhero from a freaking comic book that literally saves the world it seems unrealistic, but everybody wants to be that type of person, or at least some people. Some people just want to watch the world burn. But this dude literally saved the earth, and I don't think we get enough. Well, I can't really speak for other countries because maybe in Soviet Union he's somebody that like has his own day named after him and stuff like that. But the bottom line is he needs a day named after him.
A minor figure in the Soviet military who decided not to forward information of the attacks to his superiors for the fear that it was a miscalculation and they'd act upon it. This hero saved billions of lives and got practically nothing for it afterwards, receiving no medals from the Soviet state or even a pension,
He received
even
a
though
pension
by
in the...
some metrics he was the most important
What did it say?
from the Soviet state or even a pension.
Right. He received a pension in accordance with his rank, but not for the feat. He died in poverty. God damn it, man. This is what pisses me off. Stuff like this is what pisses me off. I don't know if, like, his family is on the internet or anything like that, but if they are, somebody needs to set up a GoFundMe or something that can give this dude the proper tribute and recognition that he deserves. He should have died a hero, and he should have died somebody that was well taken care of.
Even though by some metrics he was the most important figure of the century.
If
And
everybody
possibly
he
the total
saved
of
gave him
history.
$1, he'd be
However,
a very rich
what
man.
would have happened if that never occurred? How would history be different if Stanislav had decided to forward the information to his superiors and they in turn decided to launch a nuclear strike against the United States? How would that have affected the rest of history? How about borders, demographics, culture, and wars? That is the question of this alternate history. Before we start, if a nuclear war broke out, it would be caused by a serious miscalculation on the part of the elite involved. We can prevent this sword of Damocles by falling on us by being as logical and clear-headed as possible. You can start improving your logic skills with Brilliant. They have courses in
I'ma keep
stuff
the ad
like
in here.
logic, scientific thinking, mathematical fundamentals, and introduction to neural networks. I took and liked their logic course, since an understanding of logic and cause is necessary to understanding the past and what it means. Brilliant helps you learn difficult mental processes in a fun game-like manner. It helps you develop critical thinking skills and improve attention to detail, and you can do it at any pace you like. All their courses are developed by experts and professionals from places like MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, or Google, so you know you're in good hands. Click the link in the description to get started today. The first 200 people to click the link get 20% off their annual subscription. Start learning today with Brilliant. In this timeline, the Soviet High Command decides to launch a nuclear strike against the United States. In retaliation, the United States launches its own nuclear attack against Russia. Both countries had very extensive ally networks, with effectively all of Europe alongside many nations in the Pacific Rim being nuked. China was also an American ally during this era, and the Russians would launch nukes at them for fear the Chinese would nuke them, which would in fact result in the Chinese nuking them. The countries that wouldn't get involved in all would generally be the weaker and poorer ones, with the most substantial ones being Brazil, India, and apartheid South Africa. The way our culture thinks about nuclear radiation is really bizarre. It really reminds me of the medieval traveler's tales, in which there may have been a kernel of truth originally, but that was so inflated upon that in the end some bizarre mythology with no relation to the original truth develops. I'm just gonna warn you, this is outside of my specialty. Chemistry is one of my weakest subjects, and I'm going to get at least one thing wrong. However, I come from a proud line of preppers, and so I've studied the effects of nuclear war.
Coronavirus. Everyone. Oh my God, this is the end of the world. I never saw any of this coming. What are we going to do? My father. Finally, the month's worth of food and water that I've been permanently storing for the apocalypse is finally useful. Yeah. As far as the coronavirus is concerned, it was inevitable. Like, if you know anything about viruses and outbreaks and things like that, The only thing that is guaranteed is that there's going to be one. That's it. I can predict right here, right now, there's going to be another outbreak, much like coronavirus, maybe even worse, that's going to happen in the future. It's going to keep happening because just like humans, viruses are constantly evolving. Now, I heard somebody in a comment before say, well, so is your immune system, so it should be able to balance out or something. Not really. It depends on which direction your immune system goes and which direction your coronavirus, or not coronavirus, but bacteria and viruses go. Your immune system usually evolves on a reactionary base. It evolves based on what is affecting it. And not always like guaranteed to work. So it might change certain ways, but if something comes in that's a lot more damaging, the immune system can only do so much. Viruses, they adapt based on survivability. There's a reason why you're not supposed to use antibacterial stuff constantly, because viruses can start to adapt to it. And if you use it too much, the viruses that you were trying to kill now all of a sudden are unkillable by this antibacterial thing or antibiotic or whatever it was. But yeah, our body's ability to change doesn't move fast enough to adapt for viruses' ability to change. Mainly because viruses produce at a way quicker rate than humans do, so they change a lot more frequently and dynamic than we can over a period of time.
Or quite deeply. Radiation doesn't cause bizarre mutations, and when it does cause them, they tend to die out very quickly. You don't see stuff like the Hulk or the ghouls from Fallout. You get weird miscarriaged fetuses. Wow. Similarly, Fallout doesn't weirdly pollute an environment. Chernobyl is a gorgeous and thriving national park, with one of the most pristine forests in Europe. The main effect radiation has is a spike in cancer cases. Some say Chernobyl caused a couple thousand cancer deaths afterwards. Radiation isn't a horrifyingly weird or magical force. It's like to getting a sunburn what being pawed by a kitten is to getting mauled by a tiger. It does, however, cause a nuclear winter, which, due to the aerosols from the nuclear attack settling into the atmosphere, results in a decline of sun reaching the Earth, effectively the opposite of global warming, which results in basically a several-year winter across the northern hemisphere. Another terrible condition is that the nuclear war would weaken the ozone layer and further increase cancer cases. This would basically result in mass starvation across the world. We'd basically be forfeiting at least 1 year of harvest in the most fertile regions of the northern hemisphere. This would result in immense instability and death, of course.
Well, of course, that map that they showed earlier showed that India would be one of the countries that might get out of it okay. And given that map that showed that India has like a huge supply of like exports and stuff when it comes to food, they would probably be the new superpower. India, probably followed by Brazil. They would be one of the people that takes over, I guess.
However, when all things are considered, humans would still survive. Humans are really tough beings when pushed. Having hiked the Appalachian Trail from personal experience, I've seen the shocking transformation of relatively soft city people turning into people who can handle shocking amounts of suffering and discomfort. On a historical basis, people have lived through some really bad shit. Whether the Younger Dryas, which was 11,000 years ago when a comet likely hit Canada, thus plunging the world into an ice age in a matter of decades, or the eruption of supervolcano Toba 71,000 years ago, which blocked out the sun, resulting in a global famine and ice age. When it comes to missing a year of harvest, resulting in a global famine,
it also resulted in a genetic bottleneck of non-Africans, which is why Africa has more genetic diversity than the rest of the world combined. Interesting.
in an ice age. When it comes to missing a year of harvest, this regularly happens in pre-modern eras, with in some eras of history, like the 17th century, becoming distressingly common. With a single year of no food, most people were able to scrounge by. By the second or third year, mass deaths started to take place. In the massive food-exporting countries like the US or Canada, there would likely be enough surplus to help out a lot. There's this weird belief that a nuclear war would completely extinguish human life, or life in the northern hemisphere at least. I see little evidence for this. For the most part, it seems like a belief invented by anti-nuclear and anti-war advocates. The best projections I've seen for a nuclear war in the 1980s is 1 billion deaths and the immediate aftermath, and more due to the nuclear winter. Considering the world's population was 4.6 billion, that's around a quarter conservatively, which is manageable. The fact that, due to the nuclear arsenal's downsizing and the growing importance of missile defense systems, that the number is now at 300 million makes me feel very good about the human race. For a comparison, some historians say that the 17th century's crisis killed 1/3 of the world's population. You'll hear stuff like there were enough nukes to fully extinguish life on Earth, which is technically true. However, this is mainly since the Soviet Union and United States were having this bizarre dick-measuring contest by which they were producing such astronomical numbers of nukes, since they wanted to have enough nukes in order to still destroy the enemy, even if the enemy nuked all their nukes.
Look at this. 1965, America was completely trouncing the USSR as far as the number of warheads, and then in around the late 1970s is when they were pretty much matched up. But right before the Soviet Union collapsed, they had a gigantic spike of nuclear warheads. Now I know, based on that oversimplified video that we reacted to, that they talk about how Russia was pretty much taking all their money and putting it towards the military while the economy was doing pretty crappy and kept getting worse. Was it because they were trying to build more nuclear warheads? Was that the reason, or one of the main reasons why it did that? I mean, besides, of course, Gorbachev being a little bit more lenient with other countries, and that allowing them to get like democratic votes and voting themselves out of the Soviet Union or whatever. I'm wondering if the economy issue was because of nuclear production.
Since they wanted to have enough nukes in order to still destroy the enemy, even if the enemy nuked all their nukes before they could launch them. And then they had to neutralize those nukes in turn. It over time became a more emotional issue about a missile gap, even if the gap didn't really matter since both sides had far more nukes than they would ever use. In the nations nuked, power would immediately become much more decentralized. As the centralized governments would be incinerated, nations like the Soviet
Canada's
Union,
like, what did I
China,
do?
Poland, France, and the United States would simply stop existing, with the local authorities becoming significantly more important than the non-existent centralized ones. In many countries, similarly to after the fall of Rome, many local governments would claim to be the representatives of the pre-existing pre-apocalypse ones, but in reality that would be impossible. We've run into the issue where you see in areas like Europe after the fall of Rome, where local power would be so important and the individual influence of leaders so important that predicting anything long-term is borderline meaningless. In some areas, universities would be able to wield their student populations into cohesive military forces to seize power of the region. In some areas, the local military formations would be able to gain power. In some areas, it would be the ex-communist commissars, church organizations, the police, bowling leagues, etc. I have no idea what would occur in any individual area. In some, the local state governors would be talented and be able to hold power together effectively. In others, authority would collapse to the most basic level, with independent households or darts teams being the prime form of political organization. This sort of thing would end up being vitally important. If a state like Ohio could survive as a central organization, while Indiana would collapse into warring clans, that would give Ohio an immense advantage in the decades to come. Peripheral areas would become more important. A geographically blessed region like the Rhinelands or the American Mid-Atlantic would suddenly become nuked, while more out-of-the-way areas like the American Rockies or Scandinavia would be in much better shape. China is sort of interesting in that by this point it was by far the most rural of the powers involved, and thus would have a much higher percentage of its population survive. Similarly, smaller, more urbanized, and densely populated non-Russian Europe would be worse affected than either Russia or North America. Even in the countries that would see no nuclear strikes, there would be political instability. In Africa, where a significant part of the population would be subsistence farmers who would be susceptible to change in climate, and where central government is weak in the first place, you would see massive changes in borders and governmental collapses. Areas like Bolivia or Chad, where the peasantry are already living pretty close to subsistence, would likely collapse into chaos as centralized government would fall apart. India, although neutral as a massive culturally disparate and at the time quite inefficient confederacy, where much of the population already lives pretty close to the subsistence level, would likely still fragment and collapse even with the possibility of no bombs being dropped on it. Australia and New Zealand are both developed states that have some chance of survival. Both were of minimal strategic importance. And
I told you I'm the only one that hates the idea of meat pies.
Face minimal nuclear strikes and lesser effects of radiation and nuclear winter. With capable leadership, either state could have survived. Another state with some chance of survival is Brazil, which could turn out to be the most powerful nation on Earth. Brazil is a food exporter, and without getting nuked, would likely be able to buckle down and, with some hungry times, be able to hold together politically. Strangely enough, apartheid South Africa would likely be in a similar situation. The apartheid regime, which was always subconsciously preparing for the apocalypse, would be able to deal with the hungry times and politically repress the dissidents. As South Africa would become the only remaining power in Africa, as the continent would begin to collapse into division, would start to expand across the whole southern part of the continent. We shouldn't fall into the fallacy that just because these countries would be the most powerful and functioning states, that they'd be pleasant or developed. These would be desperately unpleasant places, likely with rationing and on the knife's edge of always collapsing. Without the global economic revolution of the 1990s and 2000s, they would also be significantly poorer. Rio wouldn't be some hyper-developed paradise, it would be a dingy city with decaying buildings. The end of the world would have a profound cultural effect on the entire world. There would be two common reactions to the world-ending horror. The first would be a massive conservative reaction. People would turn to old religion as a way of coping with the horrors that had just happened, to give assurance and stability in a chaotic world.
And preaching
People
to
would
others.
try to pastiche the past in order to maybe regain part of its glory. The warlords of the new era would wear blue jeans as a luxury item and commission rockers to entertain their courts.
I think that when it comes to the conservative people, I think they would have some tyrants running around, because all tyrants need is a scapegoat, somebody to point to and say they're the reasons why you should do this. And for the religious hardcore among us, all it would take is for a nuclear war for them to be like, hey, God is punishing us for this and that and this and this, and all you need is somebody pointing a finger at other people going, these are the people that's causing the problem. And those religious people will go out and start committing atrocities, I truly think. And the people pointing the fingers will become the tyrants, and there you go. Not saying it wouldn't happen in other areas either, it's just that I know how religious people would think in an apocalyptic scenario, and that's exactly what the hell would happen.
The second reaction would
Not all of
basically
them,
be
but
that scene in Mad
it would
Max or
be
Fallout, in which, due to the
enough to be a
horrors
damn
of the
problem.
world around them, would go off in some bizarre new uncharted direction. New religions and cults would spring up, holding some absolutely bizarre beliefs. The nuclear war would have traumatized an entire world and shattered their preconceptions about how the world should work, opening up a void. I'm just gonna say, the portrayals we get of what a post-nuclear world would look like Fallout or Mad Max, are woefully inaccurate. I understand they're dealing with a super depressing topic, and so an accurate take wouldn't sell anything, but seriously, do these people know how expensive black leather would be in a post-nuclear world? Similarly, in a world where gas is limited, people wouldn't be driving these giant gas guzzlers. A better view of a post-nuclear...
I don't think a post-apocalyptic movie centered around people driving freaking what the hell are those cars called? See, now it's on the tip of my tongue again. The Brian cars from Family Guy. I don't know, why did I forget the name of the damn car? But you know what I mean. The people driving those damn cars, it's not really entertaining. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to be intimidating when you're driving one of the Prius. It's kind of hard when you're to be intimidating when you're driving a Prius.
War's world's fashion would be the clothes you're currently wearing in terrible, overworn, stitched-up shape, with whatever terrible knitwear people could figure out how to make. The new generation that would grow up after the nuclear war would be unbelievably tough. They'd be selected among the toughest or luckiest people who survived the previous nuclear war. They'd grow up in an unimaginably harsh world. Their value system would be miles away from our current world, likely more in line with the harshest worldviews of our ancestors, combined with some millennialism and distrust of the world around them. They would look back on the pre-nuclear war era with a combination of hatred and reverence. They would hate that the world itself imploded and destroyed itself. They would likely view it as the end point of a decadent society that had been stagnating since the First World War, and many would view the nuclear war as predestined. Similarly, they would still view the pre-war society as near divine, a model they would try and ultimately fail to regain. Demographic effects would be enormous. For example, in the United States, some mainly urban groups like the Jews, Italians, Asians, blacks outside the South, and a good number of Irish Catholics would just be wiped out. In Europe, groups like the Swedes or Scots would have much more comparable numbers to the Germans or English. Technology would immediately stagnate. Advanced technologies like nuclear fission would immediately lose applicability. People would stagnate in the initial few decades to a pre-industrial subsistence economy. However, as time would progress, different communities would be able to up their economies, with more returning to an industrial level. Interestingly enough, the internet would still exist. The internet was actually created by the military in case of a nuclear war, so that scientists across America could continue to communicate.
I mean, I always, well, MIT might be the military for all I know. I always assumed MIT was just a group of like scientists or something. I never really stopped to like think too deep into it, but I was always under the impression that it was something for like universities to connect together.
I see some nerds were reading Isaac Asimov's Foundation. This is super interesting, and it would be fascinating to see this become an important variable over time. An important breakthrough for the economy would be when the former cities would finally become untoxic enough to pass through. The cities themselves aren't that important, but most river systems have cities that would get nuked, and since the vast majority of trade, especially in a world starved of gasoline, is facilitated by river systems, and with lots of strategic points in the river systems nuked, would strangle trade for decades. Development would be very patchy. With power so decentralized and trade so weak for a while, some relatively close areas would be able to get a decent standard of living, while others would still be doing subsistence farming, just due to often slight differences in quality of leadership and the soil quality having immense results. War would be omnipresent in this era. As resources would be scarce and political power would decentralize, it's almost certain.
Yeah.
As political power would be weak for the most part in the beginning, these wars would start out being small scale. However, as communities would be able to get their bearings together, they'd be able to exert more influence. The groups that could get their act together first would be the ones that would be able to secure oil supplies earliest and be able to figure out gun manufacturing first. They would have an immeasurable advantage over those who would be using odd weapons and have no mobility. Similarly, drill and military training confers unbelievable advantages that few people realize. This is how the Romans and British were able to continually win with numerically insane odds against opponents who often had similar technology. Under these circumstances, the ex-military states would have an immense advantage to those formed by bowling leagues or churches. You would start to see local power bases and nations form. As an example, let's say the governor of Kentucky in 1983, John Brown Jr., was an especially talented guy and was able to keep Kentucky together while Tennessee and Ohio fell into warlords and chaos. This would mean that Kentucky would be able to operate as a unified trade sector, which would let it get wealthier and develop faster, which would mean that it would be able to further developmentally and be able to manufacture tanks and use its National Guard regiments to train a quality army, which in turn it could use to conquer its neighbors. Then let's say Ohio did fall into warlords, but realizing Kentucky's power and by being defeated at the Battle of Chillicothe realizes they need to ally together or be conquered, and so much of Ohio unifies to form a federation in which each town has a certain degree of power. Almost none of the people forming these new nations would be political philosophers. They would be practical people trying to work through complicated situations. Under these circumstances, you would start to see wide diversifications of models. Some nations would be slave states, some would be anarcho-capitalists, and others would be theocracies. Similarly to the fall of Rome, this would effectively be a reset of the political system. The chances that countries like the US, Australia, or Russia, that got as big as they are by defeating technologically inferior non-European tribes, would ever reform are pretty low. Identities like Primorian, Texan, or Albertan would become very distinct, becoming nearly like different European nations. For the more geographically concentrated nations in places like Europe or Japan, the chances are higher that the countries would be able to reform after a century or more. A really important shift would take place once the world and much of the prime farmlands would become unradiated enough for permanent healthy human life. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, families would be tiny as the resources would be limited. However, as the environment would heal, humans would find themselves living in a really underpopulated world with mostly second-growth virgin land around them. This would spark massive population growth and a second renaissance in cultural flowering. Whatifalthist, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay tuned for additional content. Alternatively, check out Brilliant by clicking the link in the description, or checking me out on Patreon, where I've got my first few chapters of the history of the world. And if you want even more, check me out on Twitter. As always, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.
Okay, well, I might have a link for his Patreon in the description box down below. So if you want to check out more of that, then feel free to go to it and look at it. Now, one second. There we go. I will have a link for their channel. I'll have a link for their Patreon in the description box down below also. So if you want to check out more of their content, that is the best way you can do it. The Cold War is still a very interesting topic. Okay, it's still playing. I'm going to have to stop it. The Cold War is still a very interesting topic because, like I said, it could have gone so many different ways so easily. There are a lot of different points in the Cold War where we could have went from where we're going now to complete and utter destruction. And funny enough, everybody talks about how the World War III is like the end of the world and this, that, and the other. And truthfully, I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe I'm naive, but I think that humans are somewhat smart enough to not completely wipe themselves out over something that they know is bad. To just throw nuclear weapons around just whichever way you want to. To me, it would take a lot for it to get to that point. More than just, okay, well, we're at a war with another nuclear power, therefore we're going to start launching nukes. I don't think so. I think if there was a third world war, it would be just a war without nuclear weapons. The only thing that could possibly change that would be if a smaller country that has nuclear weapons decided to use them. Like somebody that was on the verge of getting taken over, like let's say North Korea, for example. Maybe they would probably try to use nuclear weapons, but even then, I think most of the world would see that it's them that's being the agitators and will try to take them out. That's it. Yeah, I think that, I don't know. Man, like I said, maybe I'm just being naive, but obviously the people that were hurt the most are the people that are, I think, there'll be the people in the smaller countries that the battles will take place in that are underprivileged and don't really have a lot to begin with. They would be the ones that would suffer the absolute most, including in a situation like this, because a lot of countries in this situation are dependent on other countries to provide aid and stuff like that. And even if the United States, for example, were to go down in a nuclear attack, there would still be enough resources and stuff like that to, I don't want to say keep them the same. Obviously not the same, but I think you could take the worst places in Africa and Asia and stuff like that, and America, if they were to get caught in a nuclear attack or something, would still be, or at least the more popular places like the New York, LA's, and the farmland areas would still be better off than those areas. Again, could be naive, 100% wrong. If you disagree with me, go to the comment section down below and feel free to express yourself and let me know where I was wrong at. This is me just going off the top of my head. I didn't really have enough time to like sit down and analyze every single scenario. So obviously I'm not going to have the perfect opinion or answers or whatever else, but that's the whole point of this, to just brainstorm and talk about it. Something you might post maybe days later, you might realize like, oh, I was actually wrong about that. If I do say something that's very wrong, hell, I'm thinking about doing this thing where I'm going to make videos maybe once a week addressing mistakes or issues that were in the previous videos, because there have been a lot of situations where I've said something in the video and to this day I'm still getting people trying to correct it, even though I corrected it in the following videos. But because people don't watch all the videos, they didn't hear the correction. So I need to come up with a hashtag that you guys could make, and sometime later on in the week I can go through my comments, look at the hashtags, and address the the corrections outright. So there'll be a specific video you can go to see if I learned my lesson. I've thought about like hashtag DaVinci corrects. Somebody made a comment that says something like hashtag DaVinci it was a play on reacts. It was hashtag DaVinci recall or recall, something like that. But the reason why I wasn't going to go with that is because it's too similar to DaVinci reacts. And one thing that you have to know is people on the internet are stupid. I'm sorry for saying it like that, but people are. There will be people that will confuse DaVinci React and DaVinci whatever the other comment was, and will be leaving requests with the correction hashtag, or leaving corrections with the request hashtag, and it would be something that would last forever. So if it's going to be a hashtag, it has to be something that's different enough. Convenient, but different. Now, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I'm going to go ahead and give you the deuces. I look forward to seeing you guys later. Be sure to check out the channel that did this video. I don't want to try to say the name again because it's going to be butchered, but an icon will be popping up over here. Until then, I'm going to give you the deuces, and I'm signing out. Deuces.